8. Coherence in the discourse. Each surah is a coherent collection of verses. These verses are not disjointed or haphazardly placed in a surah. In fact, each surah has a theme, and all the verses are aptly placed with regard to this theme. When a surah is studied while keeping in consideration its theme, and when its coherence becomes evident as a result of this study, it comes out as a well-knit unit. What is the value of this coherence? While answering this question, Imam Amin Ahsan Islahi writes, "It is absolutely incorrect to think that nazm or coherence is merely a subtle thing which has no importance as regards the real objective of Islam. In my consideration, its real worth stems from the fact that it is the door through which the real knowledge and wisdom of the Quran can be reached. A person who reads the Quran without the guidance of coherence will at best be able to understand some independent and solitary directives. Although the knowledge of independent and solitary directives is also valuable, however, there is a world of difference in having knowledge of the effects of certain plants and herbs from a dictionary of medical terms, and in the fact that an adept doctor prepares a prescription from all these ingredients which totally cures the patient. The brick and fabric of the Taj Mahal would have been used in many different buildings of the world. However, in spite of this, there is only one Taj Mahal. Without any real comparison, I would say that the words and sentences of the Quran all belong to the Arabic language. However, the unparalleled arrangement of the Quran has bestowed on them the ambience and beauty which nothing on this earth can rival. Just as families have genealogies, pious and evil deeds too have genealogies. Sometimes we regard a pious deed to be an ordinary one, whereas it actually belongs to the family of pious deeds from which the branches of great pious deeds originate. Similarly, sometimes we regard an evil deed to be ordinary, whereas it belongs to that family of evil deeds from which originate the deadliest of diseases. A person who wants to understand the wisdom of religion should be aware of all these steps and stages of pious and evil deeds. Otherwise, there is a strong chance that he would end up considering a disease which is a harbinger to tuberculosis as one which foretells of influenza and vice versa. This wisdom of the Quran is not evident from isolated parts of its discourse, but from its coherence and arrangement. If a person is aware of the individual verses of a surah, but is not aware of the meaningful coherence that exists between these verses, then he will never be able to have access to this wisdom. Similarly, the Quran has furnished historical arguments as well as the ones found in human nature and in the external world in order to substantiate some principal premise. When a person who is aware of this arrangement deliberates on a surah, he will feel that he has read a very comprehensive, well-reasoned, and satisfying discourse on the topic under discussion. On the other hand, a person who is not aware of this arrangement may have an idea of the contents of the discourse, but will be deprived of the wisdom found in the surah." Amin Ahsan Islahi, Tadabbur-e-Quran, Volume 1, pages 20 and 21. After that, Imam Amin Ahsan Islahi has explained the importance of Quranic coherence with reference to the collective and political unity of the Muslims in the following words. Every person knows that it is the strong rope of the Quran that holds together the fabric of this ummah, and all Muslims have been directed to hold steadfast to this rope and not divide themselves into factions. An obvious requirement of this directive is that we must turn to the Quran to resolve all differences which arise among us. However, it is very unfortunate that all of us have different opinions regarding the Quran. There are so many views in the interpretation of every verse, and most of these views are contradictory to one another, and we do not have any reference point to decide which view is the correct one. If a difference of opinion arises in the interpretation of a discourse, the most satisfactory thing which can resolve this is the context and coherence of the discourse. Unfortunately, most people do not regard the Quran to be a coherent book having a definite context. The result is that differences of opinions have become permanent. A lot of differences of opinion which have arisen in fiqh are because of disregarding the context of a verse. If this context is kept in consideration, one will find that on most occasions only one interpretation is possible. Most critical than the issue of juristic differences is the case of misguided sects. Most of these sects have lent credence to their beliefs through various verses of the Quran. They normally sever a verse from its context and then interpret it in the way they want to. Obviously, once a sentence is severed from its context, one can attribute multiple meanings to it if one wants to. Some of these meanings could never have even been imagined by the author, but for the fear of consuming a lot of space, I could have given several examples of verses which have been misinterpreted owing to this approach and have wreaked havoc with the actual meaning they imply. However, no one seems to be bothered to just look up the context and placement of the verse. He does not give any importance to these aspects if the Quran is being deliberated upon. Amin Ahsan Islahi, Tadabbur-e-Quran, Volume 1, pages 20 and 21. It is evident from the foregoing discussion that what makes the Quran a document having one definite meaning and which resolves all differences of interpretation and thus verifies Imam Farai's words that there is no possibility of more than one interpretation in the Quran about it is the coherence it possesses. Imam Amin Ahsan Islahi writes, "In my exegesis, I have tried to determine a single interpretation of each Quranic verse because I have given full importance to the context and coherence in the verses. In fact, the truth of the matter is that I have been forced into this because the context and coherence in the verses have not allowed me to swerve from this. The right interpretation becomes so clear and obvious, and if a person is not deeply prejudiced, he can give his life, but he cannot bear to deviate from it." Amin Ahsan Islahi, Tadabbur-e-Quran, Volume 1, page 22. It is because of this coherence in the Quran that when it called upon its addressees to emulate it, it did not ask them to produce independent verses, but to produce one or more surahs like it. The Quran says, وَإِن كُنتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِّمَّا نَزَّلْنَا عَلَىٰ عَبْدِنَا فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِّثْلِهِ وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. And if you are in doubt about what we have revealed to our servant, then produce a single surah like it. And for this, call your leaders besides Allah if you are truthful in your claim. Surah number 2, verse 23. At another place, the Quran says, أَمْ يَقُولُونَ افْتَرَى قُلْ فَأْتُوا بِأَشْرِ سُوَرٍ مِثْلِهِ مُفْتَرِيَاتٍ وَادْعُوا مَنِ اسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. Do they say he has forged it himself? Tell them, produce 10 invented surahs like it and call on whom you can except God if you are truthful. Surah number 11, verse 13. The way the exponents of the Farai school of thought have revealed the coherence in the Quran does not require any further discussion to prove that it does exist. However, what is the nature of this coherence? The following points will help in understanding it. 1. Each surah has a theme around which its contents revolve and make it into a unified whole. It is the most comprehensive statement of its contents, and what the soul is to a body, the theme is to a surah. 2. Together with the main text of a surah, there is an introduction and a conclusion. The content of a surah in some cases can be divided into sections and paragraphs, and in other cases, only in paragraphs. Paragraphs depict small shifts in subject, and sections depict greater shifts in it. The verses of the introduction and of the conclusion also may at times be divided into paragraphs as per the subject they discuss. 3. These paragraphs and these sections relate to each other not through a verse-to-verse linear connection, but through various literary devices like parables, comparison, or parallelism, as well as through statements and passages which are conditional, parenthetical, inferential, modifying, cyclic, or which signify corollaries, conclusions, questions, or answers. This, of course, is not an exhaustive list. 4. The text of a surah progresses through these paragraphs and sections and gradually reaches its culmination. As a result, the surah assumes a distinct and unique form and shape and becomes a complete and independent whole. 9. Arrangement of the Quran. The surahs of the Quran are not haphazardly compiled as is generally thought. They have been arranged in a specific order by the Almighty, and like the arrangement of the verses within a surah, the arrangement of the surahs within the Quran is very apt and meaningful with relation to the topic they discuss. In a nutshell, as per this arrangement, the Quran is divided into 7 distinct groups, and the surahs within each group occur in pairs. This pairing of the surahs is on the basis of the topics discussed, and each member of a pair has a complementary relationship with one another. Some surahs are an exception to this scheme, like Surah Fatiha, which is like an introduction to the whole Quran. Some other surahs have come as a supplement or as a conclusion of a group. This scheme, with its 7 surah groups and pairing of the surahs, is stated by the Quran in the following words: وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَاكَ سَبْعًا مِّنَ الْمَثَانِي وَالْقُرْآنَ الْعَظِيمِ. And O Prophet, we have bestowed upon you 7 mathani, which is this great Quran. Surah number 15, verse 87. Each group of the Quran begins with one or more Meccan surah and ends with one or more Madinian surah. Following is a brief description of the 7 groups of the Quran. Group 1, Surah Fatiha to Surah Ma'idah. Group 1, Surah number 1 to Surah number 5. In this group, the first surah is Meccan and surahs 2 to 5 are Madinian surahs. Group 2, from surah number 6 to surah number 9. In this group, surahs 6 and 7 are Meccan and surahs 8 and 9 are Madinan. Group 3, surah 10 to surah 24. In this group, surahs 10 to 23 are Meccan and the only Madinan surah is surah 24. Group 4, surah 25 to surah 33. In this group, surahs 25 to 32 are Meccan and the only Madinan surah is surah 33. Group 5, surah 34 to surah 49. In this group, surahs 34 to 46 are Meccan and surahs 47 to 49 are Madinan. Group 6, surah 50 to surah 66. In this group, surahs 50 to 56 are Meccan and surahs 57 to 66 are Madinan. Group 7, surah 67 to surah 114. In this group, surahs 67 to 112 are Meccan and surahs 113 and 114 are Madinan. Each group has a theme and the surahs within it are arranged according to this theme.